Google launches these amazing and expensive phones. They end up having issues and drop dramatically in price the next year. The Pixel 4 is no exception to that rule, but we have reached the point where all the issues are fixed, or so I thought. But let me tell you about the Google Pixel 4 and why you should consider this phone in 2022. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, socials are listed above, and yeah, this is a well-rounded phone that I do need to talk about. Let's get started. Overall, this is a pretty small phone by today's standards. It is taller than the Samsung S10e and clearly larger than the iPhone mini phones, but that's not a bad thing, being shorter than the compact Zenfone 8. And for those that want a larger phone, you can go for the XL. The size for me, at least, is refreshing, along with that fairly low 162 gram weight, adding up to a phone that is nice in the hands. The slight issue is the screen though, at 5.7 inches. It is a flat-ish OLED display at 1080p, giving you 443 pixels per inch, density-wise. It does look pretty good, especially with that 90Hz display, but I will have to talk about that refresh rate a little bit later. The screen size is technically small for this size, but that's because of the Soli radar on the top, as well as the earpiece and the front camera. This is similar to the Pixel 4 XL, but in this one, it does make the screen feel small. It is bigger than the 5 and 5.5 inch screen on the Pixel 2 and Pixel 3, but still somewhat cramped. However, if you are a small screen lover, this will work fine. We don't lose any features from the size other than the 1080p screen versus a 1440p screen found on the Pixel 4 XL, as well as the battery not being so good. It is a 2800 mAh battery that does work, but by now, used ones will struggle for a full day of normal usage. We do get 18 watts out of that wired charging, which is fast enough, and wireless charging for when fast charging isn't needed, or for nighttime. But other than those two aspects, we don't really lose anything else, unlike the Pixel 6 and Pixel 6 Pro. For those wanting a small screen, this is one of the last of them. Like I said, we don't lose much from this phone's size, and that continues on with the processor. We have the Snapdragon 855 chip with 6GB of RAM, as well as 64 or 128GB of UFS 2.1 storage. Yeah, the storage is pretty low, with my usage being about 50% before even adding pictures and videos. The storage speed isn't a huge deal, but it does cause some lag to happen periodically. Also, so does Android 12. It's really strange to see, but Google Pixels don't really perform that well with Android 12, often giving me touchscreen issues, the dimming lock bug where it shows the phone but doesn't lock the phone until you grab it. With the exception of that last one, normally on my Samsung phones, Android 12 has been working out pretty well, with very little to no glitches. However, these are some things that you'll see on the Pixel 4 and even on the Pixel 6, so I assume Google is to blame. Then there's the 60Hz bug where you have to toggle 90Hz to get the screen to run smooth again, and it's frustrating. Again, this is something that you will hear from people that have a Pixel 6, so I guess it's not this phone in particular. It's mainly the software. But the hardware is not that bad. Technically, the Soli radar would allow for 3D face unlock, though I'm not entirely sure if they do it. And the interesting thing to see is that there's no other phone with face unlock from Google, and there's also no fingerprint scanner on this phone. The frame is aluminum, and the front and the back are easily scratchable Gorilla Glass 5, with the back being a matte finish as long as you don't have the black one. With this, we do have an IP68 rating, but don't drop this in water because it's only guaranteed for a year, technically. There's no headset jack, which shouldn't be a shocker, just like the dual speakers. I say dual speakers because the top one doesn't seem as loud or equal as the bottom loudspeaker, but it does almost give you that stereo feel. The last thing is the Google Pixel 5 came with 5G, while the 4 doesn't. This isn't that big of an issue, but I did get some horrible LTE speeds out of this phone. Not enough to make it useless, but definitely not the LTE that we thought it was going to be when this phone came out. It is worth noting that this phone does support eSIM, even though it's not really too mainstream outside of Google Fi. So the last two things are features that I have talked about in previous Pixel 4 videos. Just like that cool always-on display and the Pixel exclusive Now Playing feature. And those are motion sense and active edges. Both features that ended in the Pixel 4 and Pixel 4 XL, with the motion sense only living in the Pixel 4 and the XL. Motion sense allows you ultimately to control what's on your screen thanks to that Soli radar, but it was never really used in anything besides music apps and when you go to pick up the phone. It probably wastes a decent amount of battery, and it is technically a cool feature, but personally the music part is kind of boring to me. I wish it was executed in other ways, but to be fair, I probably would have treated it like the S Pen. Cool, but often forgotten by myself. Active Edges is actually a cool feature, but I feel like I've already explained that in other videos, and that there's also other ways to activate the Google Assistant. I mean, there is an option to silence alarms and calls with this, but pressing the volume buttons does the exact same thing. But just like that, there are other ways to activate your assistant. Like for example, you can swipe in from the corners, hold the power button, say the words that are similar to "Alright Google," and of course, squeeze your phone. This, however, is the last Pixel and possibly even the last phone to include this. RIP HTC phones. The cameras are absolutely amazing. Well, they're supposed to be, right? Similar to the older Pixel phones, while the image is spectacular, especially at that sub $200 used price point, it's good-ish to me. Out of the standard 12.2 megapixel sensor, images come out looking spectacular, with a nice focus and background blur, even without having a laser autofocus unit. This is optically stabilized, just like the secondary 16 megapixel telephoto sensor, giving us 2x zoom and slightly more hardware-based portrait shots, mixing that with software optimization, of course. The color isn't exactly the same, and it feels like night shots are actually worse in this sensor, but it still tries. The good and the bad is that we get 4K at 30 frames per second out of both sensors, but that's it. It looks good-ish, but the phone is more than capable of shooting 4K at 60 frames per second. Either way, enjoy some photos and videos with this expertly mixed music. Now the front camera is good. If you follow the channel, you'll know that Samsung front cameras are awesome, but the Google Pixel 3 series is the best with the focusable sensor. Still, this 8 megapixel fixed focus sensor works very well, but I do notice a small drop in performance. It uses the Soli radar as a camera for depth, but it doesn't really seem to make that much of a difference in my tests. Either way, 1080p at 30 frames per second is the max for video recording. It is what it is. Overall, nice to see that these three cameras work well together, but I am seeing a drop in performance as newer phones come out. At least both rear cameras have optical image stabilization, and honestly, I agree with Google's original decision to add a telephoto sensor over the popular ultra-wide angle sensor. Of course, with the Pixel 5, they just went back on everything they said. In a world that lacks compact phones, it's nice to see that this phone exists and it's still a viable device to daily drive. But should you? While my experience wasn't anything special, I also wasn't really in a rush to move on from this phone. Personally, cameras have been less crucial. I mean, to be honest, since the beginning of 2020, I kind of stopped really needing cameras. I wonder why. But outside of the outstanding performance that the cameras give you, let's also remember that the video is not the best. And that's a good way to explain this phone. It is compact, but so is the battery. It has small storage compared to modern phones, but also limits extreme usage cases like 4K 60 video. But then the software experience is supposed to make up for all those issues, which it does. It just feels like Android 12 is off to a bad start. The good news is that it will be supported for a while. Well, hopefully, seeing that software guarantees end this year. But that's the end of my review of the Google Pixel 4 in 2022. One of the best camera phones in a compact design. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.